taking office in January, the Trump administration's actions on trade, immigration and free speech have dominated the headlines. But critics warn of another war being waged against reproductive rights. In his first week in office, Trump rescinded a number of Biden-era protections in what many call a first step towards broader restrictions. Joining us now to discuss is Michele Goodwin, Professor of Constitutional Law and Global Health Policy at Georgetown University and author of Policing the Womb, Invisible Women and the Criminalization of Motherhood. Michele, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Thank you. It's been nearly 3 years since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and basically eliminating federal reproductive rights, abortion rights. You yourself have framed this as the new Jane Crow. You're taking us to Jim Crow, basically a system of racism, caste system, repression that swept through the American South for nearly a century. Why that analogy?
The analogy is apt. If we pay attention to what the American institution of slavery was, honestly, it was a system of kidnap, it was a system of trafficking in labor, it was a system of trafficking in sex. Thomas Jefferson famously wrote to other politicians saying that it was overstated to stock plantations with men because the real profit was with women and girls. He wrote that they turn a profit every year or two. They were more profitable. So this system of exploiting sex, exploiting sexual exploitation is something that has been baked into the U.S. Foundation, and it is hard to deny because that's simply fact. And what we see now in this Jane Crow resembles the Jim Crow, where there are efforts where you have to make to try to get to another state just for your humanity to be preserved, where there is exploitation, criminal and civil, places that you cannot go, things that you may not say in public, significant repression. And you see some of those same threads unfolding now, because although Dobbs, that 2022 Supreme Court decision which overturns Roe v. Wade, the truth of it is there were Black women who were already suffering but being ignored. And they were really the canaries in the coal mine. There were Black women being dragged out of hospitals in shackles and chains on the perception that they had abused their fetuses. Now, this is at a time in which Roe was the law of the land. They could have had abortions at 10 weeks, 12 weeks, but there were already prosecutors that were surveilling them. There were nurses and doctors calling police on them. And these women experienced traumas, and they were being prosecuted with murder for having a stillbirth and much more.
After Trump's first election, there was massive resistance. I mean, who can forget that historic Women's March that almost eclipsed his inauguration? But my sense now is that there's a state of muted paralysis. There isn't as much visible engagement. Even Trump himself is amplifying his other policies and not this issue. Do you believe that this is deliberate from the White House?
Well, what we've seen is a campaign of shock and awe, only amplified now under the Trump administration. The series of executive orders that were issued in a flurry, unlike any other prior presidential term. So I want to level set just a little bit in terms of what was lost, such that we understand it better. So Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 opinion. It was overwhelming. Even the two that were in dissent were in mild dissent. So we're talking about a 7-2 decision in 1973. 5 of those 7 justices were Republican appointed. The author of the opinion in Roe v. Wade was Justice Blackmun, put on the court by Richard Nixon. So to understand what has taken shape with the U.S. Supreme Court and with Donald Trump is absolutely extreme. It does not even have a record within the Republican Party itself. So today, what is it? You're right that there is a paralysis, and in part, I think, because there is such tremendous fear. There has been such a level of domestic violence that has been inflicted, not only in the reproductive health rights justice space, but across American democracy. So it's not that these issues aren't of serious concern. It is really that there are so many aspects of American life and of constitutionalism which is under threat right now.
Last month, Georgia police arrested a woman who had miscarried. She was found bleeding and unconscious after disposing of the fetus. And they charged her with concealing a death and abandoning a dead body. Now, these charges were eventually dropped because an autopsy was conducted, and it found, I quote, that the fetus was non-viable at the time it was naturally miscarried. So this sounds like a medical crisis, and yet it is being treated as a crime. Why are states doing that?
That's right. Well, what we see is a weaponization against women and girls and their fundamental personhood. And states are engaged in a power play in this way. These prosecutions, we will continue to see them because they're really not about protecting fetuses. They're not about protecting the health and safety of children that are born. They really are tied to a system that has been intergenerational, that is well documented, of treating women as if they are chattel. And it's important that we understand that is not hyperbole, but baked into US law. And it's hard to remember in a country where, in fact, there have been tremendous gains towards democracy, tremendous ones. But at the same time, we must be honest about a history where there was coverture, such as if you were married, you were subsumed within your husband's identity. US laws that refused to criminalize marital rape because the idea was a man cannot rape his wife because she has no identity apart from his own. Even the things that are stuck in our nomenclature, such as the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb comes from judicial opinions, where if a husband beats his wife with a wooden paddle or a stick or metal that is no thicker than his thumb, it's okay. That's the rule of thumb. So that when we're looking at these patterns of civil punishment, of criminal punishment, this idea that women are stepping out of order, these are not manifestations that are entirely new. These are manifestations that go back and in some ways have been lifted up through American laws.
I've mentioned a case in Georgia, but there's Texas now where the law empowers private citizens to sue abortion providers and anybody else who helps and aids a woman seeking an abortion. So if I'm driving you to a clinic or a hospital to an abortion practitioner, I could be sued myself. So citizens are deputizing surveillance duties, basically. And then, of course, there's been a legal battle in Indiana over releasing private abortion reports to the public. In Ohio, a woman's toilet was dismantled. I'm talking about Brittany Watts. Her toilet was dismantled after she miscarried because law enforcement wanted to find evidence. They wanted to find the fetus and charge her with a felony. How do these measures impact women's rights generally?
Well, it's psychological terrorism is a way of thinking about it. Imagine having a pregnancy, including in many of these circumstances, pregnancies that women wanted. But there's a miscarriage. And miscarriages and stillbirths occur in about 20 to 30% of pregnancies, and they have for millennia. So imagine these women seeking medical care and doctors feeling the threat of state prosecutors who are very outspoken in their desire to prosecute them if they provide miscarriage management. So imagine now these women are bleeding out, and it's not an imagination, we know it, it's been documented, right? Bleeding out in their cars because the doctors are nervous because in states like Texas that you've just named, in Texas you can experience a $100,000 fine for each time that you help to terminate a pregnancy, even if it is to manage this miscarriage. Incarceration, that can be up to 99 years. And 99 years added on to 99 years if it's found to be that there were 2 pregnancies that you assisted in termination, and losing your medical license to practice. Now, these kinds of practices are taking place across parts of the United States, and so there are doctors that are deeply concerned and not providing the care that they would have in minutes, in moments, to assist these patients. But they're not doing it. So you see in some states where women are being airlifted out by doctors who care deeply but don't want to be criminally punished or experience fines. And I want to shed light on something. When you mention Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, what do we know in common about those states? And even with Indiana and Ohio, because Ohio was a border slave state, is that these were part of the Confederacy. These are the states that have never practiced understanding fully and accounting for and apologizing for slavery, for Jim Crow. It's then more natural to slip into a Jane Crow when it has been that you will engage in a civil war in order to maintain a system that denies citizenship to people, that forces them into labor, reproductive and physical labor. Keep this in mind. In 1865, the United States abolished slavery with the 13th Amendment. 1865. In 2013, Mississippi finally ratified it.
Michele Goodwin, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.